They threw me out for not being like my sister. And years later, they called me from the shelter. I was in the middle of folding laundry when the call came. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Something told me to. The voice on the other end was cracked, quiet, unfamiliar at first. Then I heard it. My mother's pause before saying my name. She hadn't said it in 6 years. She said they needed help, that they were at a shelter, that things had gone bad. Didn't ask why. I didn't ask how. I just stood there, the phone shaking in my hand, remembering the last words she ever spoke to me. "You're not welcome in this house anymore." It wasn't a fight. It was a final decision. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just packed a small suitcase while she watched from the doorway. Dad didn't say a word. Lily was upstairs, pretending not to hear. That was the end of my life in that house, because I didn't want to be a version of Lily. I was 24. I had just turned down a corporate job offer to work at a nonprofit for young women. It didn't come with prestige, or heels, or LinkedIn bragging rights, but it felt right. That was the moment Mom decided I was a disappointment, a stain on their perfect image. Lily, on the other hand, was everything they wanted. Blonde, polished, always smiling. She posted family photos weekly and spoke like a talk show host. When she got promoted, they threw her a party. When I moved out to survive, they erased me like a typo. The first few years were hard, really hard. I rented rooms, skipped meals, worked 2 jobs. But I built something, slowly, quietly. I started a small consulting firm for social impact businesses. I never bragged about it, never sent them updates. They had made it clear. I didn't belong. Still, sometimes I'd wonder what they were doing, if they missed me, if they told people. They had 1 daughter now, but mostly I stopped looking back, until that call. Until her voice cracked just enough to remind me she was still capable of needing someone, just not loving them equally. I met them at the shelter. Neutral ground. No makeup, no jewelry, no pretenses. Mom looked smaller, Dad older. Lily wasn't there. That didn't surprise me. She was never around unless cameras were. That day there were no cameras, just consequences. Mrs. Callahan led them to me. She said, they requested to see their daughter. They didn't expect this one to show up. Her eyes held something sharp. Not judgment, just truth. I sat across from them, silent. I didn't offer hugs. I didn't offer forgiveness. Just presence. Because now, the daughter they rejected was the only one who answered the phone. I was never like Lily, and that was the beginning of everything. While she loved mirrors, I loved books. She dreamed of weddings and white kitchens. I dreamed of travel and meaning. Our mother hated that difference, not because it was dangerous, but because it couldn't be controlled. From the time we were kids, I was too intense, too opinionated, too much. Lily was praised for her sweetness, her charm, her silence. I learned early that the quieter I stayed, the less friction I caused, but silence never made me their favorite. It just made me forgettable. Mom was obsessed with image. Family Christmas cards, perfectly staged dinners, public praise. Lily fit that mold like a glove. She knew how to play the part, the smile, the voice, the careful answers. I didn't play. I told the truth. And in our house, truth was betrayal. Dad was the shadow in the background. Present, but only enough to nod when needed. He never defended me. He never argued. Just looked away when I was criticized, always choosing comfort over confrontation. That silence cut deeper than Mom's sharpest words. I tried to earn their love with achievements. Graduated early, won scholarships, volunteered. Every award, every honor, handed to them like proof I was still worth something. But Lily would post a selfie in a new outfit and get more attention in a day than I did in a decade. Things escalated when I chose my own path. I didn't want the family-approved lifestyle. I didn't want the corporate ladder or the country club. I wanted to help people who didn't have what I had to fight for. Mom called it a phase. Dad called it a waste. Lily didn't call at all. One night, we had dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration for Lily's new job title. Mom toasted her. Dad gave a speech. I brought up my nonprofit project. Mom sighed. Not everything has to be so serious, Rachel. Then Lily laughed. You always make things about struggle. That night, I packed a bag. Not because they told me to. Because I finally realized they never wanted me to stay. When I reached the door, Mom followed and said, if you're not going to be part of this family properly, don't come back. Dad said nothing. Lily was scrolling her phone. I lived out of a suitcase for 6 months. Couch to couch. Then studio. Apartments. I found work in things that felt honest. Tutoring, advocacy, consulting. It didn't look successful from the outside. But it was mine. Every inch earned. Every scar a receipt. And they never called. Not once. Not on birthdays. Not when I registered my business. Not when I moved into my own place. I was erased. And for a long time, I believed that meant I was the one who failed. The red flags were always dressed up as concern. When I cut my hair short in college, Mom said, that's not very feminine. When I majored in sociology instead of business, Dad called it a soft degree. But when Lily changed jobs 4 times in a year, they called it exploration. Lily could make mistakes, and they became stories to laugh about. I made one slip, and it became a character flaw. When I lost a client early on in my consulting work, Mom said, that's what happens when you chase hobbies instead of careers. But when Lily got fired, they sent her flowers. I started noticing how conversations always orbited around her, even when she wasn't in the room. Every meal, every phone call, every family event. Lily's new apartment. Lily's new skincare routine. Lily's boyfriend. I could have vanished and no one would have noticed. Once I got nominated for a small local award. I emailed Mom the link. She replied, nice. No call, no mention of it later. When Lily was featured in a lifestyle blog about modern women, they printed copies and mailed them to relatives. I was standing right there when they did. Even in photos, I faded. Family portraits were always arranged with Lily in the middle, arms around Mom and Dad. I was placed on the end like an afterthought. And if I looked serious, Mom would snap, why do you always have to ruin the mood? I bought my first laptop with money I saved from tutoring. Lily borrowed it, just for a week, and returned it 6 months later, cracked and covered in stickers. When I asked about it, she rolled her eyes. Mom said, don't be petty. Dad didn't even look up from his paper. They made jokes, small but sharp. Rachel's probably off saving the world, Dad would say with a chuckle. Or living in another protest. Mom would follow with, we just want you to be normal. I started shrinking inside myself, until silence felt safer than defending who I was. I stopped bringing friends home. They never asked why. The truth was, I was ashamed, not of myself, but of how small I became in that house. Every compliment I gave Lily was celebrated. Every boundary I set was seen as rebellion. I learned to filter my words, my presence. Once I asked Mom if she was proud of me. It wasn't a trap. It was a real question, from a real wound. She blinked, then said, I don't understand your choices, but I love you. I knew what that meant. I don't respect you, but I'll say I love you so I don't look bad. So when she told me to leave that night, it wasn't a surprise. It was just the first time they'd said it out loud. The red flags weren't warnings anymore. They were declarations. It wasn't a fight. There was no yelling, no breaking plates, no dramatic slamming of doors. Just a conversation that shifted into a verdict. I had come home for a weekend visit. I brought groceries. I offered to cook. I was trying, again, to belong in a house that never opened fully for me. We were sitting at the table when it started. I mentioned a new client, a nonprofit tackling housing insecurity. I was proud. I said, it's small, but it's something real. Mom sighed. You're still doing that work? Then Lily chimed in, you're always chasing problems. I laughed, nervous, tried to soften it, but Mom cut in. We just don't understand why you can't be more like your sister. You could have a nice life. You just choose not to. I put down my fork. I don't want her life. I want mine. That's when the temperature dropped. Dad folded his napkin like it was an emergency. He said nothing, not a word. Mom stood up. If you're not going to respect how we live, maybe you don't need to be part of this family. I blinked. You're kicking me out? She didn't answer. She just walked away. Lily avoided my eyes, pretended to check a message on her phone. I sat there, alone at the table, the food untouched, the silence dense like fog. That was the moment I realized I wasn't leaving. I was being erased, quietly, efficiently, like a stain on a perfect tablecloth. I went upstairs and packed a single bag. I left the books, the photos, the memories. I knew I wouldn't be back. Dad stood in the hallway. I thought he might stop me. Instead, he moved aside. Let her go, I heard Mom say from the other room. She made her choice, but I hadn't. That's the part that stung. I hadn't chosen distance. I had chosen honesty. I had chosen a life that felt like mine. And for that, I was deemed unworthy, irredeemable. Not because I hurt them, but because I didn't reflect them. As I stepped out the door, I didn't cry. Not yet. My feet hit the sidewalk and I felt the chill. Not just of the air, but of freedom with no welcome, no plan, no hand to hold. Just me, a bag, and the quiet realization that I no longer had a home. At least not one that wanted me. That night, I stayed on a friend's couch. I stared at the ceiling while she slept in the next room. My phone was silent. No texts, no missed calls. Not even from Lily, especially not from Lily. That's when I understood. I hadn't just been left out, I had been replaced. And the worst part? They never looked back. I didn't fall apart right away. That kind of pain takes time to unravel. At first, I moved on autopilot, found a room to rent, picked up more shifts, answered emails like nothing had changed, but everything had. I was unmoored, untethered, alone. There's a strange grief in being discarded by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. It's not just sadness. It's disorientation. Like the map of your life was drawn by someone else, and suddenly you realize you were never even on it. I stopped talking about them to anyone. Not because I didn't care, but because every time I said my family, I felt like I was lying. I started saying the people I grew up with. It hurt less that way. More clinical, less personal, less mine. Some nights, I'd wake up gasping, dreams where I was back in that house, trying to explain myself while they stared through me like I wasn't real. I'd open my eyes, remember the couch I was sleeping on, and feel that cold rush of reality. They had meant it. They were done. Leah, the friend who let me stay, never asked for details. She just made space, fed me when I forgot to eat, sat with me in silence when I couldn't form sentences. Her kindness felt like a contrast so sharp it made me cry more than the cruelty ever had. I tried therapy, but I couldn't find the words. Every time I got close, the tears came before the story. Not from weakness, from the pressure of carrying years of silence. It's hard to explain the kind of pain that doesn't come from being hit, but from never being held. I lost weight. Not intentionally. Food didn't taste like anything. Laughter felt like a language I used to speak. I worked because I had to. I smiled because people expect it. But inside, I was rubble, burned and buried under years of unspoken rejection. Still, I kept going, slowly, painfully. I built a routine: morning coffee, evening walks, little anchors in a life that no longer had roots. I took freelance gigs, worked on weekends. Some nights I cried on my keyboard, but I never stopped moving forward, even when it felt pointless. One day, I realized I hadn't thought about them in a week. That scared me, not because I missed them, but because I didn't. That kind of detachment felt like betrayal. But maybe it wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was healing. And then years later, the phone rang. A number I didn't know. A voice I hadn't heard in forever. Cracked. Shaky. My mother's. "We're at a shelter," she said. We didn't know who else to call. And just like that, the past opened its eyes and looked right at me. The shelter was downtown, tucked between an old church and a chain pharmacy. I walked in with no expectations, not of apology, not of change, just curiosity. I needed to see them with my own eyes, the people who threw me out like trash now sitting among the discarded. Mrs. Callahan greeted me. She had the look of someone who had seen too many truths to flinch. "They asked for you," she said. "But from the way they talk, I don't think they expected you to actually show up." I nodded. I hadn't expected me either. They looked older, smaller, worn down in a way no amount of pride could disguise. Mom's hair was grayer, her blouse wrinkled. Dad's eyes didn't meet mine. They sat like guests in someone else's shame. For the first time, they looked like people, not statues. "We lost the house," Mom said. Her voice had lost its sharpness. "Lily's business folded. There were debts. She moved to California. We haven't heard from her in months." I waited, not out of cruelty, out of decades of waiting for them to say what mattered. They didn't say, "We were wrong." They didn't say, "We miss you." They said, "We didn't know who else to call." That was the wound. I wasn't a daughter. I was a backup plan. A last resort when their golden child vanished into her own escape. Mrs. Callahan handed me their intake file. I didn't ask. She just offered. "Thought you should know what you're walking into." Inside were notes, eviction records, financial collapse, a failed investment Lily had convinced them to co-sign, credit lines drained. In her name, it all came back to her. The daughter they protected, the one they believed in. She had left them with nothing but unpaid bills and unanswered calls. And the one they threw away? I was the only one who picked up when they were drowning. I read every page slowly. Not for vengeance, for confirmation. For proof that I hadn't been crazy all those years, that their loyalty to Lily had never been about truth. It was about control, image, illusion. And now, the illusion had cracked. I stood outside after reading. The sky was cloudy, the wind biting. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Mrs. Callahan. "They want to know if they can stay with you." I stared at the screen, not out of indecision, but because I finally realized I had power. Not over them, over myself. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what I'd say next. I didn't respond right away. I went home, made tea, sat with the question. Could they stay with me? The same people who told me I wasn't welcome, the same voices that labeled my choices embarrassing. Now asking for a key to the life I built, without them. The next morning, I returned to the shelter. They were sitting in the corner, side by side, not speaking. When I entered, they both stood. I didn't ask them to sit. I didn't hug them. I simply said, "We can talk. But I won't save you. Not the way you want." Mom opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to plead. But I cut her off. "You didn't lose everything because of me. You lost it because of who you chose to believe in." My voice didn't shake. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I'd lived this moment in my mind 1,000 times. Dad finally spoke. "We didn't know what else to do." I nodded. "That's clear. You called the daughter you threw away because the favorite disappeared." I held up the file Mrs. Callahan had given me. I read everything. You co-signed loans for her. You covered her debts. You protected her. At my expense. They stayed silent. I kept going. "I won't take you in, but I will pay for 2 weeks here. Give you time to figure out your next step." Mom blinked like she couldn't comprehend the boundaries I had built. Dad looked down. And that silence? That was my victory. Mrs. Callahan entered then. She looked. At me, not with sympathy, but respect. "We can finalize your payment up front," she said. I nodded, pulled out my card. As I signed the form, I felt a weight lift. I wasn't punishing them. I was liberating myself. Mom tried one last time. Rachel, we didn't mean for it to be like this. I turned to her. You meant every part of it. You just didn't think you'd need me one day. Then I handed the paperwork to Mrs. Callahan. They're under your care now, not mine. I walked out without looking back. My heart wasn't light, but it wasn't broken either. I didn't win by hurting them. I won by staying whole. I gave them exactly what they gave me, enough to survive, but not enough to stay. Outside, the wind was cold, but my spine was steady. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the one who got to decide how the story ended, and this time, I didn't need anyone's permission to close the door. The day after I walked out of that shelter, I slept in for the first time in months. No alarms, no tension in my chest, just the quiet knowing that I had faced them and left on my terms. There's a peace that comes with not needing to be understood anymore. I started doing small things for myself. Rearranged the furniture, cooked a meal just for me, put on music I loved, and danced barefoot in the kitchen. Not because life was perfect, but because it was mine, entirely, freely, finally. People always assume forgiveness means welcoming someone back, but for me, it meant walking forward without dragging their silence behind me. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need applause. I needed space, and now I had it. My business grew. Quietly, steadily. Clients came through referrals, the kind of work Lily would have called messy. But now I saw the beauty in it, in helping people rebuild what others had broken. I wasn't fixing families. I was witnessing them the way no one ever did for me. Leah invited me to speak at a small conference. She introduced me by saying, "This is Rachel. She builds what others abandon." I stood on that stage, looking out at women who had felt the same kind of quiet betrayal. I told them the truth, not the version my parents tried to write. Sometimes I still think of Lily. I don't know where she is. She never called, and maybe that's the closure I needed. Not a dramatic apology, just her absence, confirming what I always knew. I was never her mirror. I was never her backup. I was always my own person. I visited the shelter once more. Not to see them, but to donate. Blankets, toiletries, gift cards. I didn't ask if my parents were still there. I just left the supplies and walked away. I wasn't showing off. I was showing up, for someone like me in the future. My reflection looks different now. Not younger, not lighter, just fuller. I carry myself differently. I speak differently. I belong to myself in a way I never did before. Because once you survive being erased, every step you take becomes a declaration. They called me from the shelter as a last resort. But I showed up not as a daughter, as a woman who survived them, who outgrew the version of love they offered, who learned that dignity isn't given. It's claimed. And now, the daughter they discarded walks freely, not to be welcomed home, but because she built a home inside herself.